Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. So I thought that today would be a very good day to start my channel with some creature design techniques that I have used over the years, both with teaching and also working in AAA game studios and freelance film, you know, pretty much the whole nine yards. Uh, Before I get started, I will say that a lot of artists out there, especially if you're starting out, you might have trouble coming up with ideas. And you look at a lot of art on places like ArtStation and Polycount, other websites where you go, I would never be able to come up with those ideas. You'd be surprised what you can do when you look at animals from Earth. So right here on the left, I'm going to be combining three different animals, and they all come from different biomes. And what I mean by biome is, like for here, you have a kangaroo comes from the desert. The dragonfly, or dragonfly could be desert, but let's just say swamp. And then you have the Pinocchio lizard. It's an awesome lizard. I think that they were considered to be extinct, and then they just started finding them again, but I could be wrong. This one is typically tropical. So when you think about biomes, you think about desert, swamp, tropical, volcanic, mountainous, you know, places where an ecosystem can exist on its own. All right, so what I'm going to do is, excuse me, show you how combining three elements can form its own creature. And this is where the fun really begins. So here I have three images, and then I'll show you the brushes that I'll use and all that stuff, which, mind you, please don't get discouraged if you're opening Photoshop for the first time and you see a lot of brushes. You only really need two, and I'll show you the exact two to use. All right, so here I have my layers, which are the photos. So I'm just going to combine these three layers. So all I did here, those of you that are familiar with Photoshop, please bear with me. I'm just trying to explain this as easily as I can. If you have the layer highlighted at the top here, hold down Shift, go all the way down to the very bottom layer. It takes care of all three of these. And then you right click, and then, or you could just hit Control G for group. If you have a Mac, then I believe it's Apple G. So I'm a PC user. Not that I think anything's better, I just happen to use one. So we'll just title that reference. Please get into the habit of naming your layers, because there are a lot of times when you're in a very complicated piece of art and it has multiple layers. And I'm not just talking 10, I'm talking 30, 40, 50. There are a lot of times when I'm working with clients and we're working on a very complicated document and it has 50 plus layers. So if you're not clean with it, it will bite you in the end, because there are weird layers happening all over the place. All right, next layer. I'm going to title it Sketch. And this is your most important one. Now, those of you listening, if you do not have Photoshop and you are sketching traditionally, which I am a traditionalist at heart, but I'm recording this on my screen, so it's easier to view and get done faster. That's totally fine. You can follow along with this in your sketchbook with a pen or pencil. Okay, so now I have Sketch. So what brush am I going to use? So the new Photoshops come with standard brushes here. Now, I'm using the brand new Photoshop. There's a brush called Kyle Ultimate Pencil Hard. Kyle is a very well-known graphic designer, and Adobe paid him to customize brushes for the new brush sets. I've been using Photoshop for 20 years, 20 plus years. I have yet to find a brush that mimics a pencil as good as this one. So inside dry media brushes, I like sketching with Kyle Ultimate Pencil Art. And the reason is because it really does look like a pencil. It's very nice. All right, so where do we go from here? When you look at the kangaroo, you look at the dragonfly, and you look at the Pinocchio lizard, there has to be a primary, secondary, and tertiary body shape. So what does that mean? a lot of times when you see creature designs online and portfolios, it's kind of a mishmash of just random shapes. Like, oh, let's just put scales here and spikes there, and let's put a tail here, and it's pretty crazy looking. You have to think about proportions whenever you design creatures, and you have to think about the main body that it's in. So, for example, if I look at the kangaroo, I see and I'm going to change the color here so we can easily see me marking on top of this. I'm going to choose a yellow. So we see this nice body shape right here. It's kind of like a mountain. Okay, and then the same thing happens with the dragonfly, but then we have this really nice cylinder shape followed by an oval. And then here we have a very, very long, I guess you could consider it an elongated cylinder. And then you have a triangle at the end. So to me, the most interesting shape is the dragonfly. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sketching. Okay, so let's just erase primary, secondary, and tertiary. And then I'm going to choose a darkened gray color. You can sketch in black, that's fine. What I like doing is if I'm ever using Photoshop, I always try to choose the tone of gray that mimics graphite, because it's very easy to just go to pure black and sketch with it. The problem I find with that is it gives a cartoony outline feel instead of a real pencil feel. And what we're doing is we're trying to mimic a pencil. But that's besides the point. The most important thing that we're doing now is designing a creature. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what you're drawing with at the end of the day, just so you guys know. Okay, I really like the triangle and the cylinder shape. So here's how I would start it. And we're going to do a side view. Now, I'm letting my hand flow freely on the screen here, and I don't really care about making sure the lines are clean yet. None of that. Okay, so see how loose and dirty this is, and we'll get into details later. Okay, so that is the primary body type. Okay, and it gets pointed at the end like that, and there's a triangle. Now, no head yet. I'm not going to put that thing on the head, or the shape for the head. I really, really like the legs here. So if you look at these legs, let's take these out. If you look at these legs, this is going to offer a really cool combination. So this is I'm going to put P for primary, and I'm going to put the legs here for secondary. All right. So let's see what happens if I put these legs in here. Now, the cool thing is, even though I'm looking at reference from animals that exist on Earth, ultimately, you want to come up with something that nobody has seen before, right? Way easier said than done. So if I were to draw this in detail, I would be like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to draw it exactly how I see. And when the viewer looks at my animal, they're going to be like, oh, those are kangaroo legs, dragonfly body, and some parts of a lizard. We can always tweak the shapes to make them as alien looking as possible, which is ultimately what I want you to do. All right, so notice how I'm just kind of freely sketching here. That is the key, because when you freely sketch, you're going to start coming up with shapes that you didn't know existed. All right, so I really like the arms down here on the dragonfly. And it's an incredible little creature. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that torso, and then I'm just going to put some extra arms in here. How creepy would that be? So see, like, I'm not putting any musculature here. It's just free-flowing arms. And now that I'm looking at the proportion, I'm going to erase that leg, and I'm going to make it longer. And I'm just going to change the shape a little bit. See, this is where my creative freedom comes in. All right, so now I'm not directly copying from this kangaroo photo. I'm taking reference and I'm making my own creation. Next up, I need to figure out what I want to do with that head. Now, the Pinocchio lizard is pretty rad looking. The the shoulder and the neck and the trapezius muscle, it's all connected. It's very streamlined looking. So let's figure out if there's a way that we can make the head of this creature come up, and then I'm just going to give it like a really weird nose or schnoz, I guess you could call it. And it looks like a very elongated mouth, like that, and then the chin is very streamlined with the neck. Now it's looking up. So you see how loose this sketch is. There's really nothing to it. I'm going to shrink this sketch a little bit to give me more room here. Like that. Okay, so because I actually like that tail, I would like it to be longer and maybe curved a little bit, because it looks like there's sections on this dragonfly tail. So I thought that would be cool. That would be a nice attention getter for what we're doing. Now, the big question is, you're probably wondering, are we going to put wings on this thing or not? And this is where the fun part comes in. I would venture not to put wings on it. However, and the reason is because if you look at the kangaroo and you look at the dragonfly, since these are the most prominent animals that I'm taking reference from, they both have a very prominent mode of transportation. The kangaroo legs helps this thing get around. All right, they hop. I mean, I believe kangaroos can leap like 12 feet. It's just crazy how much they can jump. And then a dragonfly can obviously fly. Now, this is another thing that I have to think about when I'm designing this creature. What does it do when it needs to move around? Does it need to walk or does it need to fly? This has more of a mammal look than an insect look when it comes to moving around. So I'm going to keep the legs and I'm not going to add the wings. But that doesn't suggest that I can't do cool things with the back here. All right, so now that we have this very cruddy, dirty looking thumbnail, guess what we get to do next? The fun part. Okay, we're going to start to finalize this sketch into something pretty cool. All right, so this sketch layer right here, it's at 100% opacity. So I'm going to turn it down to about 30%. That's good. I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to call this Final Sketch. All right, so now I have the basis creature that I want, okay, like the shape. Now's the fun part where I get to add in some details. Okay, I'm going to sharpen up the design here. Okay, and I'm probably going to turn down that first sketch layer even more. There we go. So you can really see what I'm doing here. Now, there are other brushes that you can use to sketch with. A lot of times people just love the standard round. That's totally fine. Photoshop comes with the standard round and the general brushes. I have some custom brushes that I've been using over the past couple of years. Like, you know, this set of brushes I got from my art director at NetEase Games. Can't believe I still have that, but it's come in handy. It's just it's another version of a hard round brush that tapers at the end. So you want to make sure that your pressure sensitivity for your tablet fades the pencil strokes off at the end instead of making it look like a mouse stroke. And I think that's also a problem that a lot of artists have, where they forget to do that and then their sketches don't look good. So all I did here was just flip the canvas. I have a hotkey for flipping the canvas. My key is F2. If you don't know how to flip the canvas, you don't know how to hotkey, I'll get into that at maybe another lesson. But you could simply just take everything on here. Like you could, I'll show you exactly how to do it. Highlight everything you got like this. So I just click on Final Sketch, hold down Shift, every single layer that you brought into the document. Okay, go to this layer right here. You'll see a marquee square tool. Right click, free transform, right click again, flip horizontal. and it flips it for you. And then you just go back to the one layer you want to work on and yada, yada. Okay? So I'm going to flip it using a hotkey. Now I'm starting to get more details in here, and an animal's really starting to come about, and this is cool. Oh, it would help if I'm using the brush tool. Final sketch, there we go. Now I'm going to start to think about what I want these body parts to do on this creature. What kind of eyes that I want. I'm just going to keep a round eye right here because I want it to be a little otherworldly critter. And if I don't put any emotion on the eye, it tends to look a little creepier and a little weirder. Okay, so now I'm still keeping things light. Notice how I'm not trying to shade with my pencil. And that's because a lot of times shading, whether or not you're drawing on paper or you're drawing digitally, especially digitally, shading will make you go into details when you don't need to go into them yet. Okay, now is the time to get a nice silhouette of your creature. So I'm just taking some of these shapes that I can see underneath from my original sketch layer that's at 17% opacity. That seems to be a nice layer to put where you can still see the sketch underneath. And I'm just kind of floating around this creature, following the very dirty, sketchy lines that I had drawn previously. Okay, I'm going to use my own creative freedom here. And I'm going to put in some muscle that, while I'm still following a lot of the tendons, a lot of the structure here, but I'm also putting in my own little musculature, because at the end of the day, this is a creature that does not exist. And who are we to say that a creature on another planet doesn't have those kinds of shapes on their body? That's one of the funnest parts about designing creatures, is that while you do have to make it believable, you don't have to make everything believable. The main body shape here, you know that there is a hip joint here because you have a thigh and the muscle. There are tendons that run down here with its own ankle, or two ankles. I guess that's its knee. It's just bending backwards. And the same thing with the arms. All right. Now, I think that I'm going to keep it insect-like, so I'm not going to add any deltoid muscles. It looks like over here on the dragonfly that there's these weird little parts where it looks like the shoulder comes out. And I love that. And I'm going to have that, so it's not as predictable. That's just crazy looking. I love nature. Just reminds me, maybe next time I should do something with a praying mantis. I think that'd be cool. Okay, so I'm just going to put some arms here. Notice how, like, the hand direction, each arm is different. A good buddy of mine, a very, very talented creature designer, always said that it's good to put a little bit of chaos in your sketches. And what that means is, whenever we draw characters and creatures, we tend to do everything in like a static pose, and it either looks constipated or it looks very, very stiff. And if you just put a little bit of chaos in there, like if you're going to do a tentacle, instead of making a tentacle straight, put some energy into it, turn it around. I don't know if we're going to add tentacles to this creature, but I might. I'm going to flip the canvas again. Those of you working digitally, you have to make sure that your hand moves comfortably. With me, my arm produces the best lines at a specific angle. So that means that, like, if I'm sketching on paper, I physically turn my sketchbook. I don't turn my arm, because the angle that I have my arm at drawing, I can produce really good lines at a certain angle that my hand is on the paper. So if you're doing this digitally, and there's only like two directions that you ever use whenever you relax and you put your arm down and you start drawing, then just hit R and turn the canvas so that your arm doesn't really move, but it's still at that angle that produces nice lines. That will ensure that you really have a good sketch. Something I've been telling my students for years, and then the difference in their sketching in even a week is night and day. So If you notice here, I'm still not putting in a lot of detail, but I'm just refining some of these areas so we know what the heck is going on. Okay, so I took the eyeball out. I'm not really satisfied with the location of that eye yet, but I'll come back to that. Okay, so the feet. I'm going to give it a pretty alien looking foot. Okay, so maybe I'll just put like 2 toes in the front, and I am totally making it up at this point. This is the fun part, okay? You deserve making it up at this point. So it's kind of like a bird, but kind of not. All right, so let's erase some of these little bits here. Okay, there we go. Now, another thing that makes your creatures believable is a combination of 2 things at the joints. One, to give an indication of where the bone and the tendons are. Everybody right now, just look at your wrist. Okay, just look at it from the top, look at it from the side. You can see your wrist bones, like the major bone coming out, like from the ulna and then the carpal bones. Okay, your bones pop out from the skin. Same thing with your ankle. Okay, look at a dog's leg. Look at this kangaroo leg right here. Look at that giant tendon in the back of the leg. And then you know the muscles are over here on the left. Okay, you want to give the same type of believability to the creatures that you are making up. So in this case, I'm making up these tendons right here, but I'm using reference that exists. The second thing to do, after I had mentioned that, is making sure that when you sketch skin in the wrinkles, make sure that the wrinkles actually happen in places that they're supposed to. Okay, so unless this thing is 200 years old, it's not going to have a lot of wrinkles everywhere. But again, look at your own body. Okay, bend your arm, look at the part where your bicep meets your forearm. Look in between there and slowly start to squeeze your arm upwards. Look at those wrinkles happening that you can see. It doesn't matter if you're young or old, that skin will fold. Same thing with your wrist. Hold your forearm out, make a fist, or just keep your arm out and your hand loose, and start moving your wrist up and down, side to side, and you'll start to see wrinkles form. Same thing happens with creatures. And that right there is another part that makes your creatures very believable. All right, so now that I'm starting to get a really cool shape here, and I'm going to put the other leg back here. Okay, so I already have a shape that I like for the leg, like that. And then I'm just going to lightly sketch in what the other leg looks like. Right, like that. So let's flip this around. Okay. Now, another thing that I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take these lumpy shapes off of this head. And I'm just going to follow along with what's happening to the actual the dragonfly. Everything gets really skinny in here, and then the head comes out. Okay, so then I might take the bottom jaw, and then I'll round that off. Now it looks a little bit cooler, and I'm going to shorten the crease of the mouth, so it's not like the lizard anymore, where the mouth crease is going all the way back past the eye. I don't want to do that. Now it looks even more insect-like, which is kind of cool. Okay, so, one more part. I got to have the tail. Here's the cool thing. I'm not going to have the tail of the kangaroo because I don't think it's as interesting as the dragonfly. I'm going to make the dragonfly tail straight. I'm going to make it come out like almost like a carrot. And then I really like the sections. It's almost like an accordion. That's pretty cool. Now I'm indicating it with very simple lines, no details yet. Okay, there we go. Man, this thing's looking pretty crazy. Okay, what's the next step? How do I refine this sketch? All right, I'm not going to change brushes. All I'm going to do is I'm going to start plugging in some darker lines underneath the creature. So why underneath, you ask? Because I'm not going to spend hours shading this thing digitally. It's just not going to happen. You have to think about how much time this is going to take you to do it for a client. The dark line underneath the creature indicates where shadow would be located without actually shading in the shadow. And this is the coolest part about making believable sketches without putting a lot of time into it. Okay. Now, I'm no stranger to putting in a lot of time. A lot of my pencil illustrations take 6 to 10 hours, and I'm not recording a 6 to 10 hour video. However, we can indicate where some shading is simply by hatching it. All right. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm keeping my strokes very, very lightly on the tablet. And I'm not cross hatching like that. You could, but I'm not. My personal preference is just to go in one direction, push harder where need to be, go over some areas like this, and then just kind of lightly brush on some muscle shapes and other parts that I didn't touch before. So like under here, a lot of light wouldn't come in there anyway. So pretty much all of that arm would be in shadow, like this. And then the underbelly right in between those arms, definitely darker. And then the actual arm would be hatched again. Same thing here, darker in between the arms. And then the arm itself hatched. Okay, and then maybe the neck. Put in some creases here. This is where you can make up a lot of shapes, okay? Because at the end of the day, who's to say that your creature shouldn't have that? We already have a lot of believable features on this creature. So I'm just going to indicate with some shading, like in areas where I want the viewer to pay attention to. And it's just putting in a nice bit of believability here. Now, this still isn't ready if you were going to pass this on to a client, because the client, whenever you do stuff for film or games, the art director, hiring manager, whoever you're talking to, they need clarity. And I want to stress this to you all, especially if you're just starting out with art and your journey of becoming a game artist, is that it's not necessarily how good you draw, but what you're drawing. Because at the end of the day, your art is being passed along to the 3D department. And the 3D artist, they have to sculpt your drawing. So if your drawing is not clear and precise and it's muddied with shading and details and stuff, it's not as clear to them. A good friend of mine who works at Blizzard, online friend, I've never met him, but he works in the cinematic department. He said that the best art he ever gets from people at his job are lines with flat color in between them and no shading or details. And I asked him, I was like, why is that? He said, because whenever we get turnaround shots, when we have to model something, all the details that artists put inside there, it distracts us from the actual shape of the character or creature. And it dawned on me, it's like, that makes total sense. So like here, you know, you could hand this to a 3D department and they would be able to model it. You wouldn't need a bunch of detail. I wouldn't need to spend 10 hours painting this or putting every single little hair in there. No, because when you're making a design document, you're going to point out materials and the 3D artist will know where the material goes. Okay? And that's another lesson that I'll get into. All right, so now I'm going to use the head. Typically, I start with the head first, but since the body was so unique, I had to do the head or the body first. Now, I'm going to put the eye up front here, and I'm going to make it small because I don't want it to distract from any other part. It's keeping it as otherworldly as possible. A lot of times, humans, we have this obsession with eyeballs. That's why when we grow up, we always tend to draw eyes. When we draw dragons, we tend to make the eyes very big and, you know, voluptuous, and we want to draw the eyelids. There's so much personality in the eye when you do it for a creature that it's typically good to start with the head. And another thing that I teach for my online class for Computer Graphics Master Academy is there's a lot of personality in the head first, and once you get it in the eyeballs, it can dictate the way the rest of the body will look. And what I mean by that is, when I look at this creature now that I'm drawing it, it looks like not necessarily a predator, but a very opportunistic eater. Okay. In nature, a lot of predators will have the eyeball at the front of their head. A lot of plant eaters and a lot of herbivores will have it at the side of their head. Now, why is that? It's because evolutionarily, I guess, is that a word? I don't know. Predators need to hunt prey and they need to focus on the prey to eat it. Well, if the eyes are in the front of the head, like a wolf, coyote, all of the meat eaters out there, they can look directly ahead and focus on the prey. If you are a herbivore, someone who doesn't have to hunt but they eat plants, you need to watch your butt. So you need eyes on the side of your head so that you can look at warning signs from around you. Okay, so I look at this creature and I think, okay, it's probably an omnivore, kind of like a bear maybe, where it can scavenge, it can hunt if necessary, or it can just feed off the land. So I don't want it to smile, so I'm just going to add a little bit of downward movement to the face. Okay, so now that I'm doing this, I don't like that eye, or the mouth. I'm going to change the shape again. There we go. That looks really weird, but also cool at the same time. So now what I'm doing is I'm just adding in a little bit more detail on maybe some of the rib cage, maybe where the muscles meet, the shoulder and the back. I'm going to put a little bit more shadow indication on the jaw. And then the head. Right, like that. All right, and then next up, I like the way this nose looks. If you look at the lizard, the Pinocchio lizard here, there is a nose hole right there, like a little nostril, but I'm not going to put it in the exact spot. So I'm going to move it up a little bit, just like a little dot, and then that's where I'm going to put it. It'll just make it cool, and then my own creation at the same time. So another really cool trick to make certain body parts stand out on a creature, especially if it's spiky, it has big claws, tentacles, etc., is to darken the ends of the shape or whatever appendage is coming out. So I am very, very lightly pushing down on my pen here. And I'm going to go in another direction where it's diagonal, and I'm going to darken it again. And then I'm going to put some shading in on underneath here. Now, my hand is moving uncomfortably now. What do I do when I do this? I'm going to hit R, and I'm going to rotate my document, and then I'm going to sketch, but all of a sudden the line feels better. The funny thing is, I didn't move my hand at all. I just moved the document. This is what I was talking about earlier with finding your comfortable angle so that you can physically move the document and not your hand. There we go. Now, let's figure out what we want to do for the creature's hearing. I don't know how mosquitoes hear. I will totally admit that. We have ears on the kangaroo here, and lizards do have ears, but they're holes. Well, we already have a hole for the nostril, and we have a slightly larger black spot for the eyeball. Why don't we put some cool-looking ears coming in here in the back that are poking up, kind of like a giraffe. Not a giraffe. I'm sorry, I keep calling that thing a giraffe. Like this. I'll draw the inside of the ear a little bit, shade it. So it's kind of like a rodent, but not quite. And I'm going to indicate it on the other side. And then I'm going to put a little bit more shading right here on the back of the noggin. So if you look around at this creature's body and all the pencil strokes that I put here, even though it's digital, it's still giving the indication of dark and light lines. Okay, so there's some depth in the sketch. I'm going to start putting in some value on the leg muscles here. Speaking of muscles, it's a good idea to study leg muscles, and that's something that I also teach. So here I'm just going to put some very simple two-fingered hands because I don't want attention put on the hands. I want these to be simple, like this. Okay, so that we need one more hand here to duplicate that one on the other side. Think about depth. Think about everything that's closer to us will get a darker treatment. So these fingers in the front will be darker because this is the left side of the creature's body and the left side is closer to us. Right, like that. Put in maybe a little bit more indication on some muscles. And then finish this off here. Maybe some staggering fingers here. This is what I was talking about earlier with chaotic elements to your creature. There we go. And then the lighter one is in the back here. So I'm just going to lightly indicate some claws, lightly indicate some claws. Okay, so one thing you have to do for depth now is I'm just going to shade in the entire arm. But notice how the shading is just one direction. I'm only hatching diagonally. Okay, same thing with here. All right, so now that we have that, the arms on the other side, I'm going to very, very lightly sketch. Very lightly. So now it gives an indication of depth, like there's something happening on the other side of the body. And that's really, really important. Like that. And I'm going to shade in where the belly is, and pretty much all the areas on this arm part. It's more complicated now that you're putting in some details. Right, like that. Okay, so let's move down here on the leg. Maybe give it like a really cool little black toenail. There we go. Okay, now I'm just going to lightly indicate with some shading because I don't want a lot of detail on the actual legs. I'm going to hatch this in one direction. Now, it's okay if your lines are going outside of the outline of your creature. That's fine. Remember, we're keeping this sketchy. Right, like that. There we go, guys and girls. So here is what you could do if you want to combine three different animals. Now, let's zoom out a little bit. Let's look at this. Maybe you could have come up with this without looking at animals on Earth. Or maybe you're starting to see the power of looking at animals that do exist. And to rehash what we did today, we combined three different animals. So the kangaroo, dragonfly, and Pinocchio lizard. And they're from three separate biomes. So it'll give you the most interesting combination of animals. So one was primary, so primary body shape, secondary, and tertiary. Tertiary meaning, the smallest. You can also apply the same principle to coloring, because when it comes to coloring a character or creature, it's always good to have primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. You have your primary one, and then you have your secondary one. And usually tertiary is either highlights or just little accent colors here and there to really make it pop. All right, so let's look at this dragonfly, for instance. All right, it also happens in shapes, okay? You have your primary shape, your secondary shape, and then your tertiary shape. Same thing happens on the kangaroo. You got your primary shape, you got your secondary shapes, and then you have your tertiary. All right, and I can just keep going, but I also wanted to talk about the coloring too, in case you want to color it. The primary color on this dragonfly is that bronze orangish color. It's a gorgeous color. Okay. The secondary color is bluish gray. Now, the entire head is bluish gray. There are some blues and really, really nice colors on the legs. And then the least prominent color here is green stripes. down there. Those are your tertiary colors. So that's one of the most beautiful things about nature is you can combine all of those. All right. So with that said, guys, please comment below on a combination of 3 animals that you would like me to do a demo for next. I would love to hear your ideas. I really want to start this as a series on my channel because I feel not only will this help aspiring concept artists come up with ideas for their portfolios, but just if you're in a design rut in general. Like nobody wants to have a drawer's block. Okay, so this will help open ideas up. So please comment below. I would love to hear your ideas. Thank you all so much for watching this, and hopefully this will help you on your journey to being a better creature designer and a better designer overall. Thanks.